The day my daughter-in-law called my mother's ring an old piece of junk. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just picked it up off the floor, cleaned it gently with the hem of my cardigan, and put it in my pocket. And I smiled. Not because I thought it was funny, but because in that moment something shifted inside me, quietly. The way a door closes on a cold night. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew she had absolutely no idea what was coming. My name is Dorothy. I'm 64 years old. I've lived in Charlotte, North Carolina my whole life, raised one son, mostly on my own after my husband passed, and spent 31 years building a small but steady catering business from my kitchen table. Nothing glamorous, just good food, honest work, and a reputation that took 2 decades to earn. My son's name is Nathan. He was always a gentle kid, the kind who brought stray cats home and cried at the end of movies. When he was 28, he met a woman named Cassandra at a friend's birthday party, and within 6 months he was calling me every Sunday telling me she was the one. I wanted to be happy for him. I was. Mostly. I met Cassandra the following Easter. She was pretty, well-dressed, very confident in the way people sometimes are when they haven't yet had anything hard happen to them. She shook my hand and immediately started talking about herself, her job in event marketing, her apartment in uptown Charlotte, her plans to eventually do something bigger. Nathan sat beside her, looking like a man who just won something, so I kept my thoughts to myself. What I noticed was small at first. The way she'd look around my house when she thought I wasn't watching, not with curiosity, but with assessment. The way she'd make little comments, always framed as jokes. "Oh, Dorothy, you still use a paper calendar. So cute." Or after I made biscuits from scratch. "Wow, you have so much time on your hands." Little things. The kind a person could be told they're imagining. Nathan proposed to her 11 months later. The ring he chose was modest. He'd saved for it himself, and I was proud of him for that. Cassandra wore it for 2 days before she mentioned she'd seen something she liked more at a jeweler downtown. Nathan came to me with that look on his face, the one he's had since he was a boy when he didn't want to disappoint me, but also didn't know how to say no to someone. I didn't say anything. I told him the wedding was his and hers to plan, and that I would support whatever they decided. That was mistake number one. The engagement party was at my house. I cooked for 3 days. It's what I do. It's how I love. Cassandra arrived an hour late, barely tasted any of the food, and spent most of the evening telling her own mother, who I was meeting for the first time, about venues she'd been researching. Her mother, a woman named Rhonda, had the same manner as her daughter, polished on the outside, appraising on the inside. When Rhonda complimented my dining room, she did it the way you compliment a child's drawing. The wedding was 8 months later. They had a budget they'd agreed on together, and then Cassandra quietly expanded it. I won't go into every number, but by the end, my contribution was $22,000. Not because I was pressured exactly, but because Nathan's eyes carried so much hope, and I have never been good at watching that hope dim. The wedding was beautiful. Cassandra looked beautiful. I danced with my son and thought, okay, we'll make this work. For the first year, they lived in Cassandra's apartment. Things seemed fine. Nathan would call every few days, and even though he talked about her more than he talked about himself, he seemed happy. I let myself believe that maybe I'd been too cautious. Maybe this was just how young marriages were. Then her lease ended, and somehow, I still couldn't quite explain the mechanics of how it happened. They ended up moving into my house. It was supposed to be just for a few months. That's the phrase they both used. A few months while they figured out the next step. I had the space, Nathan's old room, the guest room. I thought it would be a chance to really get to know my daughter-in-law, to find some common ground. I cooked for them. I kept the house up. I adjusted my schedule around theirs. What I didn't expect was Rhonda. 3 weeks after Cassandra and Nathan moved in, Cassandra told me, over breakfast, that her mother was going through something and needed somewhere to stay temporarily. I looked at Cassandra. I looked at Nathan. Nathan was looking at his toast. I should have said no. I knew I should have said no. Every sensible part of me was standing up and waving its arms. But Cassandra was already talking about how hard it was for Rhonda. And Nathan said quietly, "Mum, it would really mean a lot." And I did what I've done too many times in my life. I said yes, because I didn't want to be the person who said no. Rhonda moved into my guest room 2 days later with 4 suitcases and a very clear sense of which mug was hers. Those months were some of the strangest of my life. My own home started to feel foreign to me. Rhonda rearranged the pantry. Cassandra started using my good pots without asking, and once I found them soaking in the sink with burned residue inside that took me an hour to clean off. When I mentioned it gently, Cassandra said I was going to get to it, in the tone of someone who had absolutely no intention of getting to it. I kept the peace. That's what I told myself. I kept the peace for Nathan. Nathan was working long hours. He manages logistics for a regional distribution company. Good steady work. Around $5,200 a month after taxes. Cassandra was doing some freelance event work, inconsistent income, maybe $1,500 in a good month. I never asked for rent. I bought groceries for 4 people. I paid every utility. I told myself it was temporary. Months passed. Christmas came. I want you to understand what that ring meant. My mother, Nathan's grandmother, whom he called Mimi, came to the United States from a small town in Georgia, married my father when she was 22, and wore that ring for 53 years until she passed. It was a simple gold band with a small oval garnet in the center, nothing expensive by today's standards. But she had worn it through raising 5 children, through hard seasons, through losing my father, through everything. When she passed, she left it to me. I wore it on my right hand for 11 years, until my arthritis made it too tight, and then I kept it in a small cedar box on my dresser. I had decided weeks before Christmas that I wanted to give it to Nathan, not as a replacement for Cassandra's engagement ring, just as a piece of family history, something that had passed through generations, something to carry forward. I wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a small box. I didn't make a ceremony of it. After dinner, when we were all in the living room, I handed it to Nathan and explained what it was. I told him about my mother. I told him I wanted him to have it. Nathan opened the box and his face went soft. In that way it does sometimes, his father's face, briefly. He said, "Mom." Just that. Cassandra leaned over to look. There was a pause, just a second or two, and then she laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. A real one. She picked it up between 2 fingers, held it up like she was inspecting something she'd found in a parking lot, and said, "This? Nathan, it's garnet. It's not even a real stone." She set it down on the coffee table with a small click. "I thought you were giving him something nice." Rhonda made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. She was looking at her phone. Nobody in the room said anything. I could feel my granddaughter, Nathan's niece from his cousin, just 11 years old, visiting for the holidays, go very still on the couch beside me. I looked at Cassandra. She had already moved on, was reaching for her wine glass. Like what she'd just done was completely ordinary. I picked up the ring. I wrapped it back in the tissue. I put it in the pocket of my cardigan, and then I smiled. Not at her, just to myself. Nathan was looking at me with a complicated expression, part apology, part something I couldn't name. Maybe shame, maybe the beginning of something waking up in him that had been asleep a long time. I said, "Who wants dessert?" and went to the kitchen. I don't remember much about the rest of that evening. I served the pie. I washed the dishes. I said goodnight and I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I held that little cedar box for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was thinking I had given these people a great deal. My home, my food, my patience, my money, my quiet dignity at 100 small moments when they'd spoken to me like I was furniture. I had told myself it was for Nathan. I had told myself family is complicated and love requires sacrifice. I believed all of that. But there is a line, and she had crossed it in front of an 11-year-old child and a room full of family, and she hadn't even hesitated. I picked up a notepad from my nightstand and I wrote some things down. It didn't take long. I already knew what needed to happen. I'd been knowing it, somewhere underneath all that keeping the peace. I just hadn't been ready to look at it directly until now. The next morning, I was up before anyone else. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in the early quiet that I used to have every morning before my house filled up with other people's needs. I looked out the window at my backyard, the oak tree I planted the year Nathan was born, bare in December. I felt very calm. At 8:15 a.m., I called my bank and removed Cassandra from the joint household account I had added her to 6 months earlier for household expenses. She had been using it for other things. I'd seen the statements, but I had let it go. I wasn't letting it go anymore. I had never given Cassandra her own credit card, but I had added her as an authorized user on one of mine for emergencies. I removed her from that too. Then I called my insurance company and removed the additional vehicle from my policy. Cassandra had been driving my 2018 Honda Pilot. I'd need to handle the key separately, but the insurance was step one. I made a second cup of coffee. By the time I heard movement upstairs, I had already composed in my head exactly what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. Nathan came downstairs first. He looked like he hadn't slept well. He poured himself coffee and stood across the kitchen island from me and said, "Mom, about last night," I said. "Sit down, honey." He sat. I said, "I love you. That has never changed, and it won't. But I need to tell you some things, and I need you to really hear me." I told him that I'd removed Cassandra from my accounts, that I needed my car back by the end of the week, that I would need Cassandra and Rhonda to find other living arrangements within 60 days. I was giving them that time out of respect for Nathan, so the transition could be orderly. Nathan's face went through several things at once. "Mom, I'm not finished," I said. Not harshly, just clearly. "I have paid for this household for 11 months. I have never complained. I did it because I love you, and I wanted to help you both get a start. But what happened last night, in front of family, in front of a child, was not about a ring. It was about how she sees me. And I'm not willing to keep handing my life over to someone who sees me that way." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're right." Just those words, quietly, and I could see it on his face. Not just agreement, but something that had been building for a while, finally given permission to surface. Cassandra came downstairs about an hour later. She looked surprised to find us both sitting there. Nathan told her himself. I had decided it needed to come from him, and I think some part of him needed to be the one to say it. He told her about the accounts, the car, the 60 days. Cassandra was very still for a moment. Then she said, "You're serious?" Nathan said, "Yes." She looked at me. I don't know what she expected to see. Tears maybe, or guilt, or the usual apologetic retreat. I met her eyes and held them. She said, "After everything I've put up with in this house," Nathan said, "Cassandra, stop." There was something different in his voice, something I hadn't heard in a long time, something like a spine. Rhonda came down for coffee and understood immediately that something had happened. She was more self-preserving than her daughter. Within 2 days, she had arranged to stay with a friend. She moved out quietly on a Thursday. Cassandra was not quiet. There were conversations. Some raised voices, not mine. Nathan handled most of it. I stayed in my lane and let him. She tried the car first. The morning after our conversation, she took her purse and her keys and walked into the garage, and I heard the door open and close. Then I heard it open again. I was in the kitchen, not watching but aware. A few minutes later, she came back inside without the keys. She had tried to use the car and realized the insurance had changed, and she didn't push it further. She tried the account 2 days later. I received a notification on my phone. Declined. I put my phone face down on my desk and kept working. 60 days was more generosity than I needed to extend, but I wanted Nathan to have time, and I wanted to do this right. In the end, Cassandra moved out in 38 days. She went back to her friend's apartment in Uptown. She and Nathan had one more long conversation before she left, behind their closed bedroom door. I don't know exactly what was said. I know that Nathan came and found me afterward. He was sitting in the kitchen for a while without saying anything, and then he said, "I think I knew." For a while, I just kept telling myself it would get better. I said, "I know, baby," he said. "She never saw you, like really saw you." "You know what I mean?" I said I did. We sat together a while longer. The oak tree in the backyard was starting to show the first small buds of January, early this year because of the mild winter. I noticed that. I noticed it the way you notice small, beautiful things when the heavy thing has finally been set down. Nathan filed for divorce in March. It was his decision, made in his own time, and I kept my thoughts to myself except when he asked for them. The process was what it was. Not easy, but not as hard as staying would have been. He's living with me still, by his own choice now, not by circumstance. He's saving money, thinking about buying a small house in a neighborhood not far from here. Some evenings we sit on the porch after dinner and he asks me questions about his grandmother, Mimi, her cooking, her hands, her laugh, things he wishes he'd asked her himself when he had the chance. I still have the ring. I wear it on my right hand now. My arthritis is a little better these days. The doctor adjusted my medication, and the band fits perfectly over my knuckle in the cool morning air. Some days it catches the light and I look down at it and I think about my mother wearing it, and her mother before her, and I think about all the things that have tried to diminish this family and all the things that didn't. Garnet, Cassandra had said. Like that was an insult. Like something had to be diamonds to deserve protecting. My mother worked her whole life for that small stone. She raised her children with those hands. She grew old with grace and never once needed anyone's approval to know what she was worth. I am my mother's daughter. I think about that every time the ring catches the light. And I think, no, you don't get to decide what is precious here. You never did. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs a person to keep the peace. Not the obvious cost, the money, the groceries, the utilities, the years of quietly absorbing small cruelties without naming them. I mean the other cost, the one you don't see, until one day you're sitting on the edge of your bed, holding a cedar box, and you realize that somewhere along the way, you traded your own clarity for someone else's comfort. I did that. I did it for a long time. And I'm not ashamed of it exactly, because I know why I did it. I did it for Nathan. I did it because I love my son, and I have never been able to watch him carry disappointment without wanting to lift some of it for him. That's not weakness. That's a mother. But there is a version of that love that becomes its own kind of harm, when you absorb so much that the people around you never have to reckon with anything, never have to grow, never have to face what they're actually doing. Cassandra never had to reckon with anything. Not until that morning. What I know now, what I've turned over and over in the months since, is that people show you exactly who they are when they believe there are no consequences. The Christmas dinner, the ring, the laugh, the way she set it down like it was something she'd found at a garage sale, that wasn't a bad moment. That was Cassandra being exactly who she had always been, in a room where she had decided, correctly, that I would not respond. She had learned that from me. I had taught her, through 11 months of patience and silence, and yes, that there was no cost to treating me that way. So in a sense, that evening was the result of every time I had swallowed something and smiled. Cause and effect, plain and simple, not punishment, not revenge, just the natural end of a pattern that I had helped create and that I was the only one with the power to stop. What changed it was not anger. I want to be clear about that. I was not angry when I made those calls the next morning. I was clear. There is a difference. Anger is loud and reactive and it passes. Clarity is quiet and it stays. I sat at my kitchen table in the early light with my coffee, and I was the clearest I had been in years because I had finally stopped negotiating with something I already knew. I think about Nathan saying, "I think I knew," for a while. And I think about how long we can know something and still not act on it, because acting on it requires us to accept the cost. He wasn't ready until he was. I can respect that. I had my own version of the same delay. What I want, if anything, is for the people watching this to hear one thing. Your dignity is not a bargaining chip. You do not have to earn the right to be treated decently in your own home, at your own table, by the people you have loved and fed and opened your door to. That is not a negotiation. And the moment you treat it like one, the moment you start calculating how much more you can absorb before someone finally notices, you have already given away something that was never theirs to take. My mother wore that ring for 53 years. She never once needed anyone's permission to know what it was worth. I'm her daughter. It took me longer than it should have to remember that. But I remember it now. Every single morning, when the light catches the garnet and I look down at my hand and think, here, this is where I begin.